Juniper Books presents The Luckiest Man in the World by Molly Cutpurse, narrated by John Crabtree PhD from his notes recorded at the time. Chapter 5
15th of February 2026. And awoke to more trouble. Or to be precise, a video call from Maggie, who was speaking softly on her mobile in her bedroom. She looked as if she had just got up, and she wore no makeup, and her hair was in a mess. I knew instantly that her call had to be important because Maggie would never normally appear so dishevelled, not even to her family. "John, the police are here. They've a warrant to search everywhere, even the cars. Dad's having an argument with them right now. It's all going to come out, John. Honestly, I haven't said a word. It's 6 a.m. Don't I know it? I heard one of them say that they're looking for anything under the Children's Act 1989 in connection with you and that child you found. Oh, for Christ's sake. First they rampaged through my flat, now your place? They're looking everywhere, and all I can hear is those mums saying that nobody knows where they are, where you are. I'm going to have to tell them something, John. I think they're going to take our phones and other stuff." "Same as me then." "Oh, God. Just tell them then. It doesn't matter. Someone's bound to let slip that the police know my address. I'm going to kill that reporter." "Don't talk like that, John. Look, if it comes to it, just move again. Live in a hotel for a while. Make it work. Have to go. Someone's coming." The connection was broken, and the first thing I thought of was that some police investigator would probably forensically inspect my sister's phone and take a note of the last time she used it. Which left me with nothing to do but wait and feel angry, increasingly angry because all I had done was save a child's life. Absolutely nothing would have occurred had I left him under that tree to die of exposure. Damn! I almost shouted it. I thought Maggie's idea of booking into a hotel until it all blew over was a good one. Do that and get another mobile would solve a few problems. Except that I liked my flat. It offered me peace and was my sanctuary. Why should I waste money on a hotel? Who was in charge of my life? My father or me? Christ, I'm 22. I'm not a child anymore. But that strong feeling didn't dilute or diminish my father's power over me, and I felt trapped. What was that old expression? Between a rock and a hard place? That felt like it. In my frustration, I found the reporter's number and phoned her, but I was only directed to leave a message. Probably she was still in bed, sleeping the sleep of the just, while causing catastrophe to whomever she speaks to. At that moment, if I had had her address, I would have ordered a taxi and created a scene. I've always been a fairly level-headed sort of man, slow to openly display anger, but at that moment I could have got furious with her. How dare she ruin my life? And then it happened. An amazingly dumb, avenging thought as I wondered how she would like to be left somewhere where she was not able to spew poison and ruin innocent people's lives. Maybe not forever, perhaps, but perhaps long enough to give her a fright or two, or 3, or 4. It was an intriguing and openly hostile thought, but talk about justice being properly served. Let her believe that she was there for the rest of her life, and just as her mind collapses under the weight of fear, bring her back again. Now, as mad and as possibly cruel as this idea was, it nevertheless stuck in my mind, the reason being that in the practical world there was no other way that I could punish her because of what she was doing to me. By practical I meant... What did I mean? I couldn't hurt her physically. I couldn't arrange things, so she was sacked because she worked for herself. I didn't want to become involved with her family, if she even had any, so what was left? By the way, the idea of going back myself to undo what I already had done had already occurred to me, but I had dismissed that because I reasoned it was all far too complex. Plus the child might have died. Now, although that might have happened 145 years ago in my mind, I could still see him, his eyes closed, so cold and hardly breathing. In my mind, he was a present situation, so he was very much alive to me, and I had saved him, and that was that. In my mind, there wasn't a single possibility of allowing him to die. I had taken the decision I believed was right, and that was that. I wasn't going to have his death on my conscience for the rest of my life. And yet the idea of teaching that reporter a well-deserved lesson intrigued me a great deal. I would even admit to becoming obsessed. And add to this, the idea grew increasingly in strength after an unwelcome visit from my father late that afternoon. I saw him on the screen of my door camera and without saying anything, pressed to let him in. My immediate impression was that I had taken him away from something more important than visiting his son, and when I opened my door he stood there sporting an angry but in control expression. "Father? John?" I never bothered to ask him if he wanted any refreshment or even if he wanted to sit. He sat anyway after taking in the grandness of the apartment and taking a brief glance from my favourite window. It was a blowy sort of day, and from my floor the extent of South London was clearly visible. "So what's this about? You sneak out without saying a word. Your mother has been worried sick. You upset the entire household and there's police swarming all over my house. Can you understand how many of my patients' personal lives have been disrupted because I can no longer work, because my computer and mobile have been taken? Have you anything to say?" I suppose you know what I did. "I've heard various things from a few sources. Why don't you tell me what happened?" I never sat. I stood looking down at him when I told him how I'd found the child and how I'd cared for him, but my father's expression did not change, and neither did he interrupt me. He only spoke after I had finished. "For your intelligence, boy, you are particularly stupid. You should have phoned for an ambulance, not taken him in a taxi. What is wrong with you?" It wasn't really an argument, just a series of verbal jabs, none of which surprised me, and it quickly became obvious that he had no intention of asking me to come home. Neither did he ask me anything at all about where I got the money to buy such a splendid apartment, although I guessed correctly that Maggie had told him. He did ask, though, how much it cost, and I told him using a far softer voice. "I believe there is some sort of reporter on your tail." "Yes, I know. I'm avoiding her." "Well, do us all a favour and speak to her. Get it over and done with before she starts digging further into our affairs." "I told the lottery people that I didn't want any publicity. This is all their fault." "I don't know what to make of you, boy. You did the seemingly impossible and you expect the media, who, let's face it, devour such stories, to ignore you. You may be one of the brightest stars of the mathematical world today, but it's bloody clear you haven't got a bloody ounce of common sense. And what have you done? Have you disowned us now?" "I don't have an answer that would please you." "Let me tell you something then, because it's been a bloody long time since you did anything to please anybody concerning your family. I'm not surprised at what you've done. It seems to me that you haven't a shred of decency in you when it comes to us. You care about some unknown boy in the street, and yet you make your mother suffer. Where's the logic in that? Where's the humanity?" "I did what I thought was right. How was I to know that there would be recriminations? All I did was save a kid's life. Are you telling me that was wrong? It's not my fault the authorities are what they are. I don't think I ought to be the scapegoat because of society's evilness." "And that's your last word, is it? No apology?" Just sit back in your multi-million-pound flat while your family's lives are disrupted. Although my medical colleagues said you were cured, I tell you now I'm coming round to believing they were in error. Is that rubbish still on your hand? I thought you were going to get rid of those. I looked at the back of my right hand before I swiftly moved it behind me. Never answered him. Your mother and Zoe want to visit you. I am against the idea, but you know how strong-willed your mother is. If she does decide, you can be sure that her visit won't be as pleasant as this one. My father stood and rearranged his coat before picking up his new brown attaché case and walked to my front door, where I expected him to throw another barb before he left. But he didn't even turn, and certainly never even said anything as he passed from my flat into the hall, leaving the door open. Walking towards it, I heard the ping of the lift announcing its arrival, and reached the hall just in time to see him enter it. The lift doors closed, and I was left alone, wondering what else I could have said that would have eased the taut situation. That evening, I took an anguished call from my mother, who told me that she had reversed her decision to visit me. Although she sounded clear and level-headed, I sensed she was not, almost as if she was reading from a script. If she were, then I knew that things had deteriorated more than I thought possible, and any compassion I had was spent on Zoe. And that is why I spent the next half an hour texting her after she sent me one. For some reason, her mobile was the only one the police had not taken. Although I didn't want to lie to her, I did blame my behaviour on my operation and recovery, and felt disgusted with myself after we ended the session. But I really couldn't understand things, because here I was, maybe the only person in the entire world who could do what I could do, and yet my family had the power to make me feel miserable and rejected. What was that all about? More dark thoughts began to consume me as the evening progressed, and Jennifer Martin became the cynosure of them. I really didn't think I was the vengeful type until I thought of her. I knew nothing at all about the woman, and yet every time she crossed my mind I gritted my teeth. Toodles! Au revoir! I'll give her toodles au revoir. Therefore, that night, just before I slept, I made the firm decision that I would do something about her, some punishment, some payback. And whatever I did, it had to be soon, before she published anything about me. 16th of February, 2026. When I awoke the next morning, the first thing I thought of was her demise. As I drank my first mug of coffee, I ran through my call history and found her easily enough. She answered on the third ring, sounding far too cheerful and lively for that time of the morning. Mr. Crabtree, this is an unexpected call. Yes, I've been thinking things over. Have you published anything about me yet? Not so far. Why? Because I think now that my family's lives have been upended, I feel the need to speak the truth so that no more harm comes to them. Enough damage has been done by you, so I may as well exonerate them. This is something I'm glad to hear, Mr. Crabtree. I believe your story will not only be of great interest to the public, but also of financial benefit to you. Not that you need that, of course. How do you suggest we should proceed? I suggest an open environment. The cafe in front of the Royal Festival Hall? That suits me just fine. When? How about 2 o'clock this afternoon? Couldn't be better. Look forward to clearing this up. Okay. See you. Toodles. And I ended the call before she could say anything else, while historical dates flashed through my head like pieces of a mathematical puzzle. So although I had been able to go back 145 years, just what was the limit of this ability? I stared at the back of my hand, but just like all the other times, nothing made any sense at all. On impulse, I picked up my Nikon and chose macro mode, took close-up shots of each. Let me call them pictograms, and put each one through an old reliable site that I had used many times previously. TinEye is a free image search and recognition company and had more than proved itself over the years. Yet, although I ran each image through its database of billions of images, I didn't get a single positive hit, which, as you might understand, I found depressing and yet concurrently intriguing. After all, if creatures from another planetary system had given me this ability, why would any of the markings be on the internet? But this told me something else too, which was, if this had happened to other people, wouldn't they do what I've just done? Unfortunately, TinEye did not save our searches, so I wouldn't know, but it was an interesting thought nevertheless. As I readied myself, in my mind's eye I could see the reporter's smirking face, believing that she had finally got what she wanted, and because I possessed an eidetic memory, visualised her pretty good. Actually, she, in some fanciful way, reminded me of somebody. It took a few moments before my memory released its data, and there she was, my mother's ancient aunt, who had died when I had been about 10. I remember visiting her house with Mother and remembering two things. Firstly was her old black dog, who it seemed didn't like me at all. And secondly, I remember looking at a photograph of her and her sister taken when they had been members of some organisation because they had been wearing brown uniforms. And that's who Jennifer Martin reminded me of, my mother's dead aunt. She didn't look exactly like her, but she had the same eyes and the same curiously full-lipped and wide mouth. Apart from those two things, everything else was different, including, I hoped, her personality. So, the past it was then. The first thing I did was I logged on to Google Earth, found that location on the South Bank, and then used the historical imagery which gave me an outline of the area 80 years ago. The blurred image didn't show me much, except that I could see in 1946 it was an industrial area. Just perfect. Let the bitch swan around there for an hour. That ought to teach her not to interfere in my affairs. Before I left my apartment to meet her, I took a look at myself in my hall mirror and was reasonably satisfied with what I saw. I didn't look like a person who had incredible powers. I thought I looked pretty ordinary for a London man of my age. Even the marks of my hand looked kind of cool. I certainly didn't look or feel like a supervillain. If you passed me in the street, I'm guessing that a large majority of the population wouldn't even give me a second's glance. Ordinary could have been my middle name. Under a clear blue sky, I arrived 10 minutes early, and there were a fair amount of people milling about under the weak winter sunshine, enough to cause me to wonder what effect one or two of them might undergo if any of them saw what I had planned. I had walked the entire distance, and that gave me plenty of time to think about what I was actually going to do, what I intended to do. Therefore, at almost the top of the hour, I stood with my back towards the cafe in front of the Royal Festival Hall, impassively watching the slow, outgoing tide of the Thames, where my shoulder was tapped twice. I swiveled my head around, and there she was, looking somewhat different from the last time I viewed her through my door camera. Her hair was now severely tied back, and half of it had now been dyed green for some reason. And seeing so much skin was not a good look for her, as it made her look masculine. However, her short pink skirt, high heels, and her ubiquitous T-shirt demanding women's rights easily offset that. She withdrew a cigarette from her mauve painted lips, and blew smoke from her nostrils. Don't mind this, do you? Don't worry me, I vape myself. I found myself suppressing a smile, knowing what I had planned, and turned fully to face her. Nothing was said for a few moments, but then she pointed at the cafe. "Shall we? Could we just stay here for a moment? There's something I wanted to ask you." "Can you ask sitting down?" "I prefer to stay here. Won't take a moment." She gave me an expression of impatience and took another drag, never once taking her eyes off me. "Well, do you have your mobile on you?" "Of course." "Do me a favour and take it out." "Why?" "Humour me. I called this meeting. It's going to go my way if you want to learn anything." Now showing annoyance, she rummaged about in her bag and produced it, holding it as if it was a kind of weapon. "What now?" "Open up the clock app, will you?" "Why?" As I never answered, after showing more frustration, she did what I asked. "And now set a timer for an hour." "Is that how long you're going to give me? I can assure you it won't take that long. If you wouldn't mind, humour me." Her thin fingers moved nimbly over the surface, and in a few seconds she had done what I had asked. "What now? Can we sit and get this thing going? One more thing. Can you start the counter and put it back in your bag, please?" After taking another drag of her cigarette, she did just that, and in the second or so that she was distracted, I tapped the markings for the 1st of July 1946, and then moved my left arm towards her. Having dropped the mobile into her bag, she turned, looked uneasily to see that I had moved closer. Her head dipped as she looked at my hand and its markings. Then she looked at my face again as I began to speak in a low and secretive tone. "You have an hour. If you want to return to this place, be here when the timer goes off. Understand?" A wonderful look of confusion crossed her face, and she had no time to answer, because at the same time as I grabbed her forearm, I pressed the final mark and closed my eyes as a defence against the expected dramatic change of light levels. Therefore, I didn't see any immediate change, but I certainly felt it, as immediately the air around me was instantly warmer. I didn't hear any noise coming from her at all, and I let her go. I can't really say how I expected her to react. Perhaps a yell, a scream, or a squeal. But I heard nothing. In the few seconds I was there, amongst the wasteland and the desolation of the aftermath of the Second World War, I only saw a few men operating some form of steam crane. The sound it made was so distinctive. I pressed the return mark, and once again the colour and light of 2026 popped into existence, and my nemesis was no longer beside me. The question of how people would react when they either saw me disappear or appear was answered immediately as a young and pregnant black woman pushing a buggy with a child in it walked past me, and she did a classic double take, and then continued walking as if nothing had happened. I stared at her for a few moments as I realised that she had to realise that what she thought she saw couldn't possibly have happened, and therefore must have put it down to one of those things that happens out of the corner of her eyes. That's what I thought anyway. However, she had taken no more than 10 steps when she turned and looked over her shoulder as she continued walking, her mouth tight and her eyes squinting as she glared at me. Only when I began to walk towards the cafe did she actually turn to see where she was going. By the time I found a table outside, she continued her way, no doubt with an interesting story to tell her husband or boyfriend. Using my own timer, I spent the next 50 minutes jotting down a few notes and thinking my usual thoughts about the same old mathematical problems before I returned to that spot overlooking the Thames, with accuracy to the minute and making sure I was in exactly the same place. I touched the marks again, and instantly I became part of the smoky, noisy and chaotic world of 1946. For the first few seconds I couldn't see her, but then I noticed a movement near my feet, and there she was, sitting or half lying in the dirt, partly supported by an old wooden fence. It was impossible not to notice the green hair and her short pink skirt, as well as the blood on her legs. I leaned down, grabbed her arms, and pulled as the timer on her phone sounded. "Come on, up you get." She was heavier than I thought, so it took some effort. But it didn't take me long, thank goodness, because we had become the subject of some interesting bystanders, mostly men. Only when I pulled her up straight did I press the return mark, and as if some painter had suddenly washed away the canvas of 1946, the world returned to normality. And this time nobody noticed us, except perhaps the CCTV, but I gave that no thought. Anybody reviewing that footage would surely imagine there had to be a fault somewhere, a stutter in the flash memory. However, it was seconds after we began to once more breathe the air of 2026 that I noticed Jennifer's face was smeared with blood coming from her nose, and that she had sustained some damage to below one of her eyes. Her pink skirt was scuffed and torn as well, and I felt a rising sense of compassion. Perhaps I had gone too far. Perhaps I hadn't thought things through enough. Steadying her, I walked her to the cafe and found an unoccupied table and ordered 2 coffees and asked for a glass of water, which arrived straight away as the young waitress seemed overly concerned as to the condition of my companion. "Is she okay?" "Yeah, she's just had a shock, that's all. Thanks for the water." "Coffee won't be long." Jennifer remained slumped over the table. Her head rested on her hands, and I didn't like at all the amount of blood that I could see. I saw that one of her ears was crimson and slightly swollen as well. I took a paper napkin and touched it against her face. Although she still didn't say anything, she took it from me and pressed it harder against her skin under her eye. At that moment I didn't know what to say, but I had a feeling that I had gone too far, as a few customers were beginning to take an interest in us. Perhaps they thought I had hurt this woman. I had imagined that suddenly being in 1946 would initiate in her enough panic and fear to make her wish that she had never met me, certainly enough to destroy the notion of continuing to investigate me. But clearly something else had happened, because I never saw either panic or fear. Jennifer, talk to me. What happened to you?" She lifted her head slowly and gazed vacantly about her before she focused on me, one eye partly closed, and spoke loudly through gritted teeth. "What the hell did you do to me?" And that didn't quell the interest of those in nearby tables who were still looking at us. "Can you speak quieter? What happened to you?" "What are you?" "I'm sorry?" "I said, what are you? How did you drug me? Why?" "I didn't drug you. I sent you somewhere." "What happened there?" "I've peed myself. Oh, God." Without warning, she pushed back the chair and left, walking towards the riverfront, leaving me staring after her at the same time, aware of the shocked cafe patrons. It was a moment's hesitation, but I decided to follow, and after throwing down a £5 note, caught up with her after just a few metres. "Jennifer, I'm sorry, stop walking." I touched her arm, probably the worst thing I could do, and she spun round. "What are you?" "Jennifer, you need to see to your face. You're bleeding. Sit down here." There were no public seats, so we sat on the ground, and I noticed she was trembling. I'm sorry, I wanted to teach you. I said, what are you? What did you do to me? The truth? I sent you back to 1946 for an hour because you were bugging me, and I don't want anything written about me. Somehow she sniggered, but I could see in her eyes that she thought I was insane. What are you? I said, what are you? I'm nobody, really. I'm a mathematician, but that's all. Then what did you... If I tell you, you'd only write about me, and I don't want to be exposed. Do you think I won't write about you now? You can't. You just can't. How? Tell me how. I deserve that. Tell me what happened to you first. Her eyes seemed to glaze over for a moment, but then refocused. These three women appeared, really weirdly dressed with faces like, I don't know, overly painted faces with weird hair. And they surrounded and just started on me, calling me names, telling me to get off their patch. And everything was so different, so confusing, and I couldn't speak. Then they got really aggressive, attacking me, pulling me this way and that, kicking me, spitting on me, punching me. And one of them banged my face against something, and I suppose I must have passed out, and I heard you again, and then I was here, bleeding. What did you do to me? I told you, I have this ability. Keep away from me. No, don't touch me. Leave me the hell alone. She rose to her feet again and stood ungainly, and I wanted to tell her I was sorry, but she began walking away. This time I didn't follow her. I just watched her walking, or rather tottering towards Blackfriars Bridge, understanding that I had done wrong, but now also knowing that I hadn't a clue how to put things right. Apart from the shock of realising that I'd done something bad, I felt fearful as well now, knowing that I might have done nothing more than pour water on oil that was already blazing. I mean, thinking about it now, what a stupid thing to do. However, believe it or not, I slept well that night. I shouldn't have, I suppose, but I hope that the fact that I did enjoy a decent night's sleep didn't make me a mean person. I knew that what I did was in some ways unconscionable, but when I had to protect myself, don't you agree? Surely you can agree. Our security desk on the ground floor was manned 24/7, and the three normal crew consisted of Joyce, a straight-talking but friendly ex-police sergeant who voluntarily, as I was informed, left the force over a dispute over wages, Samuel, who was a far older man who had been disabled in Operation Shader, close to the end of completing his active military service, and a woman called Rosalie, whom I had never had the pleasure of meeting as she always worked the graveyard shift. Nevertheless, her companions never spoke about her in anything but glowing terms. According to them, Rosalie was single, had been engaged in security work for a few years, and was reliable, truthful, and was a mother to a 3-year-old son. How they felt about protecting the 27 residents who owned the multi-million-pound flats on wages that were just above the minimal level remained unknown to me when I spoke to them in the lobby as I entered and left. Our conversations were never lengthy. It was to Joyce that I spoke to the most, as it was she that sorted out the Royal Mail and gave it to us as we entered. This was because the regular mail person did not have permission to walk beyond the second door, which led residents and their visitors to the lifts. This was because our own personal doors had no letterboxes, and furthermore, all incoming and outgoing had to sign in and out, so security was always tight. It was only to be expected that the amount of mail I should receive increased as I let more companies know of my change of address. Most of these transactions were done online, of course, but there were still those who used real pieces of paper which I had to sign and return. How 20th century of them. 26th of February 2026. However, not long after the reporter's brief trip and return from 1946, Joyce began to hand me these grey, rough envelopes. And as they began to arrive each day, my name and address was always handwritten in an unusual copperplate font, and the message on the single sheet of paper was always short. And after letting me know that he was an associate of Jennifer Martin, the reporter begged me, in his words, for an audience, and it was always signed, "Your friend, Maximilian." I really didn't know what to make of this at all, except to think that if this man knew Jennifer Martin, then he was probably the last person I would want to meet. What did he want with me? Was he a friend who had promised her that he would hurt me, or worse, do something else? Did he want money, some sort of blackmail, or did he want something more unusual? It was those last thoughts that played on my mind, and after receiving more than a dozen, each repeating itself, I did begin to become overly concerned, to the extent that I ordered an increased amount of food and basically curtailed my leaving the flat a great deal. All I basically did was collect my mail from Joyce and asked her if she had seen any suspicious characters hanging around the place, to which she always replied in the negative. However, I had plenty to occupy myself, as I had decided to write a paper on a subject that had intrigued me since I had been a boy. The twin prime conjecture would keep me busy for a while. That's if my 3 new and just delivered expensive laptops didn't have a meltdown. Those of you who are students of mathematics will know what I mean. Obviously, and wishing not to insult your intelligence, I will not bore you with any of these mathematical details. However, it is enough to say that the problem kept me occupied until the 5th day of my self-imposed isolation, when a thin crust pizza decided that it was tougher than one of my incisors, and moments later my tongue felt its ragged top. Although it did not hurt, I understood that such an injury to one of my front teeth ought to be seen to as soon as possible. Therefore, I applied for an emergency operation with my family dentist, Dr. Perez, and I took a taxi the next morning to Harley Street, where he promptly and kindly fixed the problem. However, a larger, if not more exacting issue began when I was standing in the street hailing another cab to return home. For a middle-aged man, perhaps in his early 50s, taller than me, but wearing the type of clothes that were not only available in the best of London's West End, stood next to me. Not that I was an expert at all concerning fashion, but the man did look smart, and conspicuous by the fact that he was wearing a monocle and had a full beard so trimmed that it came to a point. His grey hair was long and thinning, and to be honest, he looked like a Shakespeare look-alike. Concerning style and wearing fashion, I could have written what I knew about the subject on the head of the proverbial pinhead. All the same, this guy looked sharp, and there was something about him that just screamed money. Perhaps it was his fancy walking stick topped with ivory carved into the head of an elephant, or the expensive but, to my eyes, gaudy-looking rings on his fingers, or maybe his wristwatch, the value of which I didn't even care to calculate. I saw that when he lifted up his arm to check the time. Moreover, when he spoke and unsubtly asked me if I had opened his latest correspondence that he had personally posted yesterday, his tone and his diction didn't cause me to believe that this fellow wanted to injure or kill me. I looked at him sharply. "I'm sorry, I don't believe we met." "We have certainly not been introduced, Mr. Crabtree. Or may I be allowed to call you John?" "You are the person, Maximilian, who has been writing to me?" "I have that honour, yes. But I am surprised that you do not reply to my request for a meeting. Please accept my card. I did. And a very fancy gold lettering one it was too. You have been following me. My business concerning you is important. And you're a friend of Jennifer Martin. Not so much a friend, more an acquaintance. May I share this cab with you? A black cab pulled to a halt, and I momentarily paused as I garnered my options. If this man had made this much effort to find and follow me, then it seemed to me that sooner or later I would have to hear him out. So it might as well be today in public, and while I had a witness in case the situation, whatever it was, turned ugly. So I nodded. Okay, you have my attention until I get to my destination. More than enough time, John. As soon as we had settled and we moved off, I saw his eyes were directed to the marks on my hand, and I covered them with my other one. Jennifer and I have known each other some time, but as I mentioned, we are not close friends. However, she thinks of me more as a man with a taste for the unusual. I suppose this is because I come from an unusual family. Oh, really? Indeed, my father was the British ambassador to Morocco during the latter part of his employment, and my mother originates from one of the oldest and wealthiest families in England. Suffice to say, my upbringing and education was interesting and eclectic. Would it be agreeable for you to call me Max? If you want. Thank you. Now, needless to say, Jennifer's sharp and inquiring mind, plus my interest in all things unusual, make for a good team, and we have been able to help each other out on occasions. Some for the better, and some for the worst. Okay. Which is why she arrived at my lodgings a short while ago in a particularly wretched condition, sporting a story which bordered on the fanciful. And all to do with yourself. I see you are not impressed enough to speak yet. So she spoke of a recent experience she had undergone involving the mysterious and seemingly fantastical idea that she had somehow been sent back in time by no less than yourself. You do understand she's a reporter, and I suppose part of her remit would be to seek out the unusual and fantastic. That's probably what her editors want. The more outlandish the better. I suppose she's got a file stacked away somewhere which would expose Paul McCartney as an alien brought to Earth as a baby, or that UFOs are real and are being studied by the government. Maximilian smiled and glanced at his watch. Jennifer is a clean sort of woman. I happened to visit her not so long ago, as it happens, and what I saw did not surprise me in the least. Have you seen any of those appalling, intrusive television shows where the owners can hardly carry on the business of their lives because their homes are so cluttered? I believe I saw an episode once, and we might agree on how revolting and degrading they are. What about it? Was there a place like that? Somehow I wouldn't be surprised. An old typewriter or computer surrounded by pillars of paper and books. On the contrary, John, if I may use your first name, her modest two-bedroomed apartment would put a Japanese minimalist to shame. There was not a cup or a pen out of place, and the entire area had been sterilised to the extent that a surgical operation could have been performed in her living room. And so, when she appeared at my door, knowing that I was the only person who might well believe her fantastic story, I took her seriously. Seriously enough to call on the services of a close friend of mine who happens to be the SEO of a forensic company that Scotland Yard uses when they need a little extra manpower. He took multiple swabs from her body and clothes, and do you wish to know the results? Not really. Well, yes, they are rather technical. I glanced over them myself, and let's just say they certainly intrigued me. And, by the way, perfectly exonerates Jennifer's story, that she had spent a short amount of time fighting with females, apparently back in time other than this one. What do you say to that, John? I'd say that if she had any sense, being a nutcase, she'd book herself into the nearest secure mental hospital and get some treatment. So this fantasy, is this why you've been sending me letter after letter? I would have thought a man like yourself would have had better things to do. Unlike yourself, John, I am a man who has the capacity and the capability to get things done. To achieve this, I have garnered many acquaintances upon which I can call, and so intrigued was I with Jennifer's story, so completely and utterly out of character, I may add, that I set in motion a few ideas myself. As she had indicated exactly where this improbable event had taken place, using my contacts, it hardly tested my intelligence when I went searching for evidence. Although I was trying to appear nonchalant by staring at the passing traffic, I felt myself stiffen as I inherently knew where he was going. In the next few seconds I was proved correct. So perhaps you wouldn't be surprised at the footage I recovered from no less than 3 CCTV cameras that were positioned around the cafe. Shall I press on? As I did not even turn to look at him, let alone reply, he did. So what I have in my possession are over 3 hours of footage from 3 different angles which show an interesting meeting between yourself and Jennifer Martin, as well as a signed affidavit by a waitress who claims to have witnessed an odd occurrence which she was unable to explain. Shall I continue now? This time I looked at him, and he could see my annoyance, and the fact that I was not only chewing the side of my mouth, but breathing more heavily than I ought to have been. All the videos are in real time, as a signed affidavit by the manager was generously given, and all 3 shows the exact time she apparently disappeared, and then reappeared approximately 1 hour later in that considerable condition of distress. I think we both now understand how you managed to win the national lottery twice in 2 weeks. And on this basis I set myself a small task, or at least got my minions to examine your life in a little more depth. Not a stranger to hospitals, are you, John? Not a stranger either for having something untowards growing in your brain. What do you want? Ah, the perennial question, and to the point. I like that. The question is, John, why did you do that to Jennifer? And more important, how? You work for the government, I suppose. Surprisingly, I do not. Then how is a person able to get the resources to do what you've done? I mean, poking about in private medical files. Just who are you? I'm a man who is offering you a proposition. A, you scratch my back, and I'll scratch yours, sort of thing. And if I don't, what can you do? I've not broken any laws. That is true. However, there remains the problem of keeping your abilities secret. And that's a pity, because you have, thus far, gone through a considerable trouble to maintain it. Are you blackmailing me? Is that what this is about? Such an ugly word, John. And no, I am not. But I am offering you £1 million for me to experience for myself what you did to Jennifer. Of course, I stared at him, speechless, and then I noticed the taxi was beginning to arrive in familiar streets. Maximilian spoke no more until the car had pulled alongside my flats. You would turn down that amount of cash? I have money. But sooner or later your funds will diminish naturally. Most bank accounts do, you know. One moment the person is flush, and then, oh my goodness, his account has been hacked. And then one day he goes to his hole in the wall and finds his bank balance is zero. I've heard such things do happen, you know. You'd better come in. Excellent. That's the ticket. Once inside, he stood in my living room admiring the space, my art, and the decor before he chose a seat. It was only then that I looked at him in more detail. He He was actually a great deal taller than me, and although his clothes were new and pressed, they were oddly mismatched. Generally, he looked like a country gentleman of the type that might adorn the front page of the Sunday Times magazine, the Modern Aristocrats, Gentleman's Journal, or the Tatler. I was aware of these only because somebody in our building had ordered them, and occasionally I saw Joyce sorting them into piles. He wore a crisp white shirt, dark brown pants with matching blazer, and a waistcoat of the same material from which hung a fob watch on a gold chain. His pants were tucked into long black boots, and he sported a flat cap. He carried a portfolio which he placed beside him. As I already had decided not to play host, I offered him nothing. "Well, am I to garner from that you wish to consider my offer? £1 million in exchange for the same treatment you gave my friend?" "She's not my friend." "As you wish." "So what exactly do you think happened to her?" "As an elementary guess, I would say that somehow you transported her back to London in the middle of the last century for 1 hour. You waited, drank coffee, and then retrieved her. Their injuries came about for what I can only assume were 3 ladies of the night, possibly believing that she had unremittingly encroached on their area. Your silence tells me all I wish to know. You are not denying it, then?" "I'm not affirming it." "Well, that's a start." "Why should I trust you?" "Because, my dear boy, as I said, I'm offering you £1 million to have the same experience. This is not blackmail, as you so disturbingly use the word, but collusion. And if I don't agree, you will ruin me. Is that it? That's a criminal offence. Do you mind if I smoke?" "Help yourself." Given his manner and deportment, I expected him to bring out a gold cigarette case engraved with his initials and smoke an expensive cigarette through a long and expensive holder. However, the reality was more prosaic, as he took out a packet of regular tobacco and rolled himself a thin cigarette of the type a construction worker might make on a building site. After lighting it, he stood and faced me. "John, we can continue bandying about this, but you have my terms. So for the final time, can we shake on the deal? I will pay into your account half the money and the rest after I return. If you return." "Quite. If I return. That is to say, if you do not retrieve me, then certain documents will be placed before certain people who will have the ability to take certain steps." "That's a lot of certainties. And what if you die there, whatever it is you want to go?" "In such a case, I will expect you to recover and bring my body back. Only by doing that will you prevent my colleagues from participating in your downfall. So you are admitting that already there are people quite unknown to me who are aware of what I can do, and so you won't be the last of them to harass me. Tell me, do you think I'm a fool? The documents about which I have spoken are securely locked in a vault. Only after a period of time yet to be discussed by you and I will they be released. Nobody except Jennifer at the moment knows what I wish to do. So I take it she is one of the certain people. We can agree today, or I can return if you need more time to consider. Just out of curiosity, how is she? Recovering. You might care to know that she does not consider you to be one of her best friends. No Christmas card for you. She is currently spending some time under the care of a professional, but you ought to know, I personally believe it will take more than a few visits from him for her to gain back her wits. She shouldn't have attempted to blackmail me. And I think what you did was appallingly cruel. To change her perception like that, so briefly and without warning, tells me a great deal about your character. Let me ask you, John, do you feel no shame for what you did to her? Because when I first saw her, she was a gibbering mess, panic-stricken that it was going to happen again. I believe those thoughts will remain with her for the rest of her life, eternally vigilant about being lost again in a place where she ought not to be. Jennifer Martin may appear on the surface to be a hard-nosed reporter, but everybody has their limits, and the more I discuss this with her, the more I am inclined to believe that she would not have lasted long back in 1946. I think it's best that you leave now. I'll call you. No, I'll be the one who gets in touch. I'll give you 2 days to make your decision. Immediately he left, I looked at the ash he had left on my new carpet, and for some reason that angered me more than the man himself. I thought to follow him clandestinely, if I could. But when I saw him from my bedroom window, he didn't walk away but stood still by the curb before a large black car came alongside and whisked him away. It looked all very cloak and dagger to me.
You have been listening to an audio production of The Luckiest Man in the World by Molly Cutpurse, narrated by John Crabtree PhD.